Welcome to another episode of Big Cash Breakthrough, your gateway to digital wealth. Please welcome Leo Glisic, a visionary leader who's transitioned from a successful career in corporate finance, where he led a 100-person team in finance operations at Ring Central, to spearheading innovative developments in the blockchain and social media sectors. Captivated by the potential of blockchains and smart contracts since 2007, Leo grew concerned about the centralization of media and political power through social media platforms. This led him to conceive a groundbreaking approach to economically decentralized social media in 2019. Following his passion, Leo left his corporate career to found MyTree, where he is currently dedicated to enabling interoperability in social media and creating social coordination tools that enhance our ability to connect and coordinate with each other. Welcome.
Thank you, June. Thanks for having me.
So I always start my interviews with the question, how did you get into crypto? When did you first hear about it? What's your story there?
Yeah. I first heard about Bitcoin back around 2012 timeframe, just forums and things like that. And it's funny, I was working in corporate finance at the time. This was at a semiconductor company called Applied Materials. It's an older company, a bit of a dinosaur. And I remember I was mining Bitcoin around that time, 2012, 2013. And I would go in and tell my coworkers I was mining Bitcoin, and they would all make fun of me because they would be like, Bitcoin, what's that? What, you're mining what? So I was like, no, this is what I'm doing. And I tried to explain it to them, but they were more looking to make fun of me than actually understand it. But it was really a side hobby at the time. I didn't end up mining too much Bitcoin. I should have kept up with it, but I got bored with it, and Bitcoin was this limited use case, right? But then when I heard about Ethereum a few years later, that's when I started getting really excited about the technology outside of just, okay, we have a cool decentralized payment system, but the ability to have a decentralized computer that's Turing complete and allows us to do anything just opens up a world of possibilities. And it got me really excited about all the things that could be built on it. So that's really when I started digging much deeper into it and getting more involved with, just again, still on the side while I'm working my full-time corporate finance job, but I started to attend Ethereum conferences and started becoming a validator eventually, and so on. It's been a bit of a journey in that sense.
That's fantastic. So yeah, really early on with mining. And so what made you transition from it being more of a hobby like in 2012 to learning about Ethereum to transitioning now more full time to it? What was that? Was there any significant moment where you said, okay, hey, I'm ready to make this transition? Because coming from the corporate world, it's very different, right? To startups and
100%. Yeah, it was a personal journey of mine that, even though I had a successful career and was climbing the corporate ladder pretty well, like corporate finance, I wanted to do more with my life, and I wanted to find a way to contribute more to the world, and understanding that from just a values-based point of view, that I would leave that career track no matter what and start my own company no matter what. And I made that decision. It didn't necessarily necessitate that this would be something that was in crypto or blockchain. I just viewed that as a really cool technology, and it's a potential tool to solve some problems. It was really in 2018, if you remember, I think around maybe August timeframe, that Alex Jones got banned by all these platforms within 24 hours. I remember he got deplatformed from Facebook and YouTube and Twitter all within the same 24 or 48 hours. And I have no love for Alex Jones at all, but it really opened my eyes to how much power is centralized in just a couple of companies. And that kind of centralization of media power is extremely problematic and very dangerous. I'm originally from Bosnia. I grew up there during the civil war there. And going into that civil war, it was a pretty communistic kind of system where the state had monopoly over the media power, over the state media. And when they decided to galvanize everyone to go to war, they were able to do that seemingly overnight, because they were just able to apply this mass propaganda through the media channels. And suddenly, some very ugly things unfolded, and neighbor was killing neighbor. And, in the US, I always worry about, hey, we've had a really good run of a really successful democracy, but that's not the norm across human history. The norm is war and revolutions and centralization of power. And so we have to be very vigilant about protecting this and having this kind of centralization of power in just a couple of monopolies, right? Nowadays, between Twitter or X and Meta, we have two people that could get behind closed doors and decide our next president, and we wouldn't even know it. right? They would just change the algorithms and we would be blind to it. This is something that I consider to be an existential threat to our democracy and can lead us down some very dark pathways. And it's a problem that we under-index in American society, at least because things have been so stable for so long that I think most people in the US just think, oh, this can never happen here. But it does happen. It happens quite a lot all the time across the world. It's a problem that I decided to take on personally because of my background and my experience and skill set and the way that I'm able to contribute to that problem. And it was really thinking about the fundamental problems we have in social media, which is that we have these really strong network effects that lead to winner take all outcomes. And that's what results in a monopoly in every use case. So you end up because you end up with one winner. And why can't you get 100 different Facebook challengers or meta challengers to all interoperate with one another, share their network effects, and take on and displace Meta? The fundamental problem is they don't trust each other, right? Because as long as it's a winner take all market, there's no trust, and they know that even if they successfully displace Meta, the new market leader can then run off with the market and become the new monopoly. And so there's no trust to interoperate to begin with. And so it's a really fundamental business understanding of that landscape that I could see that problem on the one hand, and then I could see clearly this other new technology coming up that allows us to create decentralized trust. How can we combine these two to say, okay, now we have a new technology that actually allows us to all combine forces and share our network effects, and yet decentralize the trust that nobody will wall off and nobody will run off. If we create the right incentives towards interoperability and we make sure that those incentives are always maintained, even if there is a market leader, then it's no longer a winner take all market and everyone will actually trust each other to interoperate. And so it was really, that's what allowed me to devise this and design this mechanism that would accomplish that, and it allows us to actually what I view to be the best chance at changing really the rules of the game and changing the landscape of our social media. And it allows us to do it in a way that is a win for everybody. We have all these other projects decentralizing social media in a very technical way, whether you're putting identities or social graphs or data on blockchains or peer-to-peer protocols, and those are fantastic projects. And it's like, how do we get those projects to then interoperate with one another? And you can apply the same principle. So it's very complementary. And allows, if you think about Lens or Farcaster or Blue Sky, we don't have to have it so that only one of them is the new winner of this landscape. They can all be winners and they can all share their networks into an even greater network. And that way it lifts all boats and we don't have to have a one size fits all. So it's a way that really combines with a lot of the power and innovation that they're doing and allows us to give everyone an even stronger chance of succeeding and let us win this together. So a little bit of a long-winded answer, but hopefully that covers it.
Yeah, that's great. I think we can break that down from maybe go backwards, but starting from the point of, okay, hey, you have a thesis for decentralized social media that creates more of a collaborative structure to it. Were there any inspirations you had from, because system design and architecture is incredibly difficult to get right, and there's probably a lot of academic research papers out there, but what was your inspiration kind of coming into this, and maybe that inspired you to come up with this particular solution?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was a bit of a journey from the realization that there is a solution to actually coming up with a solution was probably close to a year. And it was something that I would just put in the back of my head and think about periodically while I was working a full-time job, having other responsibilities in life. And I'm really somebody who is a big proponent of free markets. So when I consider solutions, there's been solutions proposed that are more regulatory in nature, but I don't think government has the answer to this. I think antitrust actions against social media monopolies are destined to be ineffective or just splinter the network in a way that breaks value for everybody. And so I always look for, hey, can we have free market solutions? Thinking about market design, one big inspiration just generally about how people talk about the flaws of capitalism, but it's like capitalism is ultimately an expression of freedom and people behave according to incentives. So it's like, it's all about designing the right incentives, and there are better and worse incentive systems. So it's like we can make capitalism better. And one of the books that actually inspired me to really think that way is Radical Markets by Eric Posner and Glenn Weil. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but that's one where one of the topics they cover there is quadratic voting in that book, and they go into it in detail, and they have a few other ideas. But it was really more about a big takeaway for me was like, wow, we can actually redesign things with different incentive systems and play around with them. So it was that combining with my background in corporate finance and business strategy, my education at I have an MBA from Berkeley, and really understanding the business strategy from those framework as well, and how certain things change the way that we play different games in business strategy. And then the culmination of it all really happened in 2019 when I'd been building up to this, but I went to Burning Man in 2019, and it was really at Burning Man that I spent quite a bit of time just everyone around me is like doing the Burning Man thing and partying and going to dance stages and stuff. And I'm just sitting there in my camp, just noodling on this problem for 3 days straight. But I was just compelled. I was just compelled to think about it and really try every possible permutation and kick the tires in all sorts of ways. And then coming out of that burn, I had a solution, and I took it over to a very close friend of mine. And that was the first thing I showed up to him. First, I went home and whiteboarded a bunch of it because I didn't have a whiteboard Burning Man. But then I went to his house and I was like, I got to show you this. And then he was like, wow, this is cool. And I have never seen this before. And that's what convinced him to actually come out of retirement and join me on this journey. So that's my co-founder, Jesse. And we've been fantastic working together. But that's how it all came together.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of inspiration comes out of Burning Man, right? It's this, yeah, really a kind of radical kind of community and free thinkers. And so that's great. In terms of, okay, so let's, for maybe those that aren't familiar, you could maybe explain the landscape of some of the new web decentralized social medias, and then maybe traditional media, and how you see being able to have everybody collaborate together. Because that seems to be like your thesis of this work, right? Where it's like people won't maybe try to monopolize everything and realize that, hey, we can work together and share the benefits of having a more censorship resistant social media foundation. Or maybe other platforms will have different degrees of centralization, I would assume.
That's exactly right. You nailed it. It's really a mechanism that does not prescribe a certain level of centralization or decentralization from the participants. It's one that changes the incentive system so that any player in this ecosystem is incentivized to interoperate, whether they have a centralized or decentralized architecture. So you can imagine a bunch of Web 2 and a bunch of Web 3 social media participants, and still all incentivized to interoperate. And so as I was mentioning earlier, the fundamental problem right now in social media is that you have this winner take all dynamic. And so it's, as soon as you are a market leader, you know that if you wall off your network and your users can't talk to the other networks for the same use case, then all the users from the smaller guys will come over to you because of Metcalfe's law, and they'll be able to gain access to more users. And so eventually everyone coalesces on the same network. And so the incentive is, if you're the leader, the incentive is, if I wall off, then I'll kill all my competitors and I'll become the monopoly. And that's what we've seen happen. And even though there's been the pretense of open APIs from both Facebook and Twitter in past years, we also saw very quickly that these were much more predatory in terms of, if it was good for them, they keep it. And if you pose any kind of threat to them, they shut off your head and they kill your business. And so the road is littered with a bunch of dead startups that trusted the Facebook or Twitter APIs to remain open when they were very selective to their own benefit, because the incentives are not there. So the way that we change the incentives is through a two-layer architecture. So you imagine a bunch of social media apps on one layer, and then there's another layer below that, which we're calling social media browsers. And users access all their social media apps through a chosen browser. And through that browser, you can access dozens or even hundreds of social media apps, and they're all aggregated for you into a single interface. And so as a user, you can belong to all these different apps, and each of these apps can choose their own architecture and have their own social graphs, and how they store those social graphs, whether they do it on the blockchain. So you might be something like Warpcast is an app, and it's plugging into the Farcaster social graph. That's a Web3 version. Or you could have a traditional Web2 app that's putting its social graph on AWS. But either way, those social graphs all get aggregated at this other layer, and it creates this greater network effect. And once you have this kind of two-layer ecosystem, you have competition at both layers, and so you have choices at both layers. And so what that does is, suddenly at each layer, nobody gets to be a gatekeeper to the network. They can only be a doorman, because if you try to cut off your users from the network by walling off, your users can just jump over to a competitor of yours to access the same broader network, to access that other layer. And the best way to illustrate that is, if we think about analogous two-layer ecosystems, for example, like operating systems and apps, or like gaming consoles and games, we can see that those are not winner-take-all markets. You can have competition in both layers, and everyone, including the market leader, is incentivized to keep interoperating. If we take the smartphone market, like you got iOS and Android, many versions of Android, and then you got a million apps sitting on top of that. And even for the market leader, which would be Apple in this case, they know that if they wall off and they say, we're only gonna interoperate with Apple applications and not all these other apps, they know that most of their users will just jump over to and get an Android and then access all the apps to get access to the larger network. And so it keeps everyone now interoperating instead of walling off. And so the idea here is to recreate the same in social media. And one of the beauties of that is that it doesn't prescribe, like you were saying, a one size fits all, because now you can access all these Web3 apps and Web2 apps. And Web2 apps can also be ones that honor your privacy more, or ones that don't, then ones that use an advertising model or ones that use a subscription model, and so on. And you let the users choose, right? Because some people care more about privacy, some people care more about free instead of paid, and so on. But you let all these things coexist. And the most important thing is that we have competition, and that competition keeps everyone accountable to the users. Because if you start abusing your users like we're used to from some of these monopolies, they know that they can easily lose you to the competitors. That's what keeps them actually in check. And it creates a tremendous amount of innovation because now you have this open ecosystem, and we can quickly out innovate any of these companies with a closed ecosystem. I always give the example of, imagine if Microsoft never opened up Windows, right? And we'd have about a dozen apps on there. You'd have Internet Explorer and Windows Media Player and Microsoft Paint. But instead, you have over 1 million apps for Windows. And right now, we have these social media monopolies that have about a dozen apps each on them. And we have a hard time even imagining what social media with an open ecosystem would look like, and all the innovation we would see, and all the different use cases and different ways to collaborate with one another and better connect with one another, and so on. So that, to me, that's what really excites me. And that's where, once we start getting this together, that's what gives me a really high level of confidence that we will be able to basically beat the incumbents, and their business models will force them to either die or capitulate and open up and truly join this kind of open ecosystem in order to survive, because they won't be able to keep up with the level of innovation over time.
Okay. And what is your kind of strategy right now? It seems that there's to me, there's at a high level, there's a couple things I think are challenges to be successful. More, I think one more from the app side, and then the other is to sell people on the incentive, like to get big ecosystems to also participate and partner with you guys. So maybe starting from, I guess, that part, and then we could go on because I do see on the app side, we can mention that it seems it's cool to have an app where you can just have an aggregator of apps, right? So maybe we'll start with that concept. So are you guys building like this product that's more like an aggregator so that people can just go to your product so that they can post on multiple platforms, for example? Is that also kind of part of the roadmap, or is that something there?
That is correct, but I think aggregator is probably too narrow a way of describing it. I call it more of a browser or even an operating system for social media, because it's not just aggregating the views of these things, but it's interoperating at a much deeper level. And and for applications, it offers a positive sum game, right? If you imagine 100 apps out there and they have 1 million users each, if they can all interoperate, that creates a 100 million user network. And from each of their point of view, they're sharing 1 million users with the network, but they're getting access to another 99 million users. So because of the way network effects work in Cloudflare, law, 1 million user network is much, much more valuable than 100 million user networks. And so you create a tremendous amount of value and everyone benefits. So as long as everyone knows it's not a winner take all market anymore, and they can trust each other to interoperate, then it's a no-brainer for them to join. And it's really important that they get to preserve their control over their UI, the control over their data, and the control over their relationship with their users. And so you have to make sure you offer that to them. And as we've been having these conversations, we've met with over 60 smaller apps so far, and nearly 100% response have said yes, they want to interoperate with this as we're building it. So we've been able to really hear them out, understand what's important to them, and make sure we're supporting them with that. And some of those are Web3, some of those are Web2. So it really is a mixed bag there. The other thing from a strategy point of view, that this is something we started actually this year, is, and I've talked to you briefly about this before, June, which is how do we not just build more apps in a traditional way, but create an even better way that we can relate to one another online. And one of the big things that we've been missing in traditional social media is our sense of community, right? The way we relate and interact with one another is not through these simple one-on-one relationships like they're mapped on social graphs, but within groups and communities. But social graphs really are missing that group context, right? So it's how do we also represent group memberships and the extent to which we belong to certain groups, so that we can enable apps to use that context to create to give us a lot more dimensions when we're interacting online. Not just allowing us to interact within smaller groups, which is how we're naturally used to interacting with one another, but also allow us to then steward those groups in a way that allows them to grow in line with their common interests and values, and maintain that focus of what was the purpose of that group. And so that's a project we're calling community graphs. And so that's another layer that we're building on top of this. I talked about kind of the 2-layer as sort of a starting point to break the winner take all, but there's another layer which is called community graphs. And that's a decentralized way of representing and mapping group memberships. And that's what we're building now. And as we've been talking to people about it, we've seen so much demand for that that we're actually going to roll that out first. It's also a little bit simpler to build out. So we're hacking that together in this next coming up, a month coming up at Esmeralda, and then we're going to have the alpha pilot fully ready for Zuzulu, Georgia, and that's where we'll also be opening it up for other people to build on it and so on. But really excited for that because it will allow us to build new types of capabilities that don't exist on traditional social media that just relies on social graphs, and build new social coordination tools on top of that, right? When we think about identity systems and reputation systems, communities are key to our reputations. And once we have our reputations online, then we can use those reputations to attest to all sorts of things. So I can get more into that, but just to get back into the main answer here to your question of what's our strategy, it's really this two-pronged approach, like building out community graphs, allowing applications to build on that, and then giving those applications a way to interoperate with one another through the first social media browser that we're building. And then we're going to open source that to invite competition at the social media browser layer as well, because we really want healthy competition at all layers to exist, and finding a way to bring all these different applications together and create a superior user experience for the users.
Yeah, it does seem really fitting in the Web3 crypto space because there are so many different chains, communities, groups, meme coins, let's say. And so it is, and it becomes a little tribalistic, but I think everyone's connected together through the common interest in Web3 and crypto. And there are people who overlap in various communities as well. But it seems as though I would assume that a lot of these community graphs would be more in the Web3 space compared to Web 2, right?
We're seeing a lot of interest on both ends. For example, I was just talking to someone from Burning Man org about potentially using community graphs for that as well, because I would say really any decentralized community, especially as you're trying to grow the community, one of the big problems you run into is how do you maintain the ethos and the values of that community as you grow it bigger and bigger? And if it's decentralized, how do you allow a level of governance that actually is commensurate with the level of involvement that people have, right? Because if you have a community, let's say 100 people, well, some people might not do very much. They just belong to that Discord channel or that Telegram channel or whatever, and maybe say something every once in a while or give a smiley face. And other people are like spending their full time working in this community and really contributing. And so what you find is with those kind of communities, you want the people that are a lot more contributing, a lot more involved to have more of a say over the direction of that community. And so if you map memberships and level of memberships and level of involvement that people have in a decentralized way by allowing members to actually attest for one another, then you can use that to improve the community governance. And that's very applicable for both offline and online communities. For purely online communities, what becomes extra important is having Sybil resistance, because if you're all meeting in person, it's obviously there's only one of you here and you're human. But with purely online communities, it's how do I know you don't have 6 accounts inside this community and you're casting 6 votes instead of 1 towards whatever. And so what community graphs also allows us to do is build out Sybil resistance based on communities and social graphs, and also incorporate and integrate with other identity systems, whether it's Proof of Humanity or WorldCoin or Proof of Passport, more centralized ones like that. You can stack all these different signals as a community and say, okay, you're more likely to be human and have a unique account if you have these specific types of credentials or all these different identities, you're checking these boxes. And different communities have different needs of like how important is it to be Sybil resistant. Another thing is collusion resistance. And this is for both online and offline communities. But to your point, we're seeing more of a need from Web3 because we're seeing so many experiments with public good funding mechanisms, such as quadratic funding. Within quadratic funding, one area that becomes problematic is collusion, right? Quadratic funding is a beautiful mathematical model that works as long as you assume no collusion. But once people start colluding, the optimization that you get from the math quickly goes away, and it actually can be very suboptimal. And collusion can take many different forms. If you have all these different projects and you're contributing towards certain projects, and you can get your friends to contribute, or you can contribute to one another's projects, and it's what's allowed, what's not allowed, what's coordination, what's collusion. It gets into some very interesting discussions there of each community has to define for themselves. This is the kind of behavior we want to allow, and this is the kind of behavior we don't. Even just promoting your project. It's if you're just giving information about your project versus what if you're promoting it and advertising it to people so that more people come and contribute so that you get more matching funds? Or what if you start rewarding your users of your project to go and contribute? Right now you're bribing that kind of quadratic fund voting. So what community graphs allows us to do is have reputation systems that are really robust, because you can have a reputation for not colluding, let's say, and that reputation can carry from community to community through overlapping memberships. So through different communities, you can extend the reach of your reputation much further than you would through a social graph. Because you might even have a community that has a reputation that can vouch for you as you join some other new group, and there might not even be any overlapping members, no members in common, but because the community that's vouching for you has its own reputation, and that can reach a lot further than the reputation of an individual. They can say, no, this person, this is their unique account, or this person does truly have this reputation for being an upstanding citizen in a quadratic funding round and not bribing others and so on. Like an analogy here in a centralized world would be, let's say you might be in the US and you want to travel to Japan and you want to prove that you're human. A centralized system like LinkedIn might be able to have a company attest that a certain account on LinkedIn is validated because you work for that company and they know that, hey, you work for us and this is your only account, and that provides Sybil resistance. So let's say that's Microsoft, right? So like you work for Microsoft and you have a LinkedIn account and Microsoft can attest for you. If you go to Japan, a few friends from the US attesting for you isn't, or vouching for you, that's your unique account, isn't that necessarily valuable because there might be too many distances away from each other, too many hops away from each other on a social graph. But Microsoft's saying, no, we vouch for them. That has a lot further reach because it's a larger organization that has a reputation of its own to uphold. And so similarly, you can have communities themselves that can vouch for their members and that can have a global reach. So now you start establishing these kind of credibilities, and reputation. And by having them through communities, they can become a lot more credible and also have a lot further reach than they would through purely social graphs. So it starts opening the doors to helping us solve a lot of problems. And yeah, it is both Web2 and Web3, but we're seeing a lot of excitement from quite a few Web3 projects about this to address a lot of different needs, as I was mentioning.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so, yeah, we definitely should talk more offline on Sybil resistance, collusion resistance, and reputation systems. Those are all incredibly important, I think, for a lot of these newer social systems, social economic systems. So going back to maybe a few more questions. How do you incentivize? So what are they giving as a network? Do they give maybe information about their social graph if they do have that, and that's what they're offering to this other kind of like the group, the bigger group of being part of MyTree network? Is
You're,
that kind of the idea?
you're talking about applications for joining MyTree?
Yeah, just the communities. Yeah, let's say you have a
Communities.
community and or groups.
As a community,
How do you incentivize? What's the selling point? You say, hey, come on board to this. You're offering this from your community and you get X and you get Y. Like, what's the pitch to them?
yeah, the pitch is really you get a lot of community tools and social coordination tools. For example, imagine if you're running a community and you want to gate access to certain things, but you want to do it again based on not just binary, like you're either in the community or you're not, but you want to do it on more of a spectrum or based on membership levels, right? So you might have a community forum that can then plug into, you attest for each other, you create these membership levels based on each other's attestations, and then a community forum could plug into that and say, okay, within this forum, if you're less than 10% of a member, you can read the forum posts, but you can't reply to them. So you can be on the periphery, but you avoid a bunch of people that aren't really in the community spamming the forums and diverting the topics and so on. But then if you're between 10% and 80% member, you can reply to the forums. And then if you're above 80%, you can also moderate the forums, right? So that might be one way that you can gate it. As I was saying, the difficulty of how you grow a community is one that is, if you have a group of 10 people, growing that group is, we can all just feel out who should be new members. But it's once you have, this is a question that the Zuzulu community is facing right now, and a lot of communities face as they grow, which is how do we invite new members? How do we open this up, but not just open the floodgates that anybody can join, right? So how do you find that balance of like, how do we let new people into a group, but in a sort of mindful way that's preserving the ethos of this group, right? And so maybe each person gets one invite or two invites that they can bring people in, and then those people have to stay in for a while before they get more invites. And that's a way of vouching for one another. But it could also be that maybe if you are more of a central member, you get more invites, right? So it's like you come in, you're a 0% member, maybe you work yourself up to 10, 20% member, and now you get an invite, right? But if once you get to 80% member, you get 3 invites. You get to bring more people in because now you're much more of a central core member of this group. So you allow these communities to be stewarded in a way, in the way that they grow and in the way that they evolve, in a way that's much more nuanced, but also at scale, which is something that doesn't exist for online or offline communities today, not for scale, right? Similarly with governance, if you want to make certain community decisions, like I used to organize a Burning Man camp, and this was a smaller one, around 40 people. And so, but even at that scale, you run into this issue of how do you make camp decisions, right? And it's just simple decision of, oh, we were going to have a certain camp theme of what we're going to contribute to Burning Man, and what should the theme be, and how should we execute it, and what are all the different parts of it. And what you find is, okay, that when it comes time to do all the work, because it's all voluntary, right? When it comes to do all the work, some people do a lot of work, some people just show up, right? But then when it comes time to make these decisions, you get some people that are overly vocal about the direction of the community, but they never lifted a finger, right? They just show up and didn't really contribute much. So it becomes a problem of, I don't want to just do a straight majority vote, because some people should not get as much as a say as the other people. It's like how much you actually contribute in and who's going to be doing the work, right? It's easy to sit there and backseat drive of like, this should be our theme and we should do this and this. And when it comes time to work, like everyone else is going to do the work. It's no, the people that are going to do the work should be the ones that. So when it comes to volunteer kind of organizations, nonprofit organizations as well, it becomes extremely valuable to have a certain tool that allows this kind of nuanced governance. Okay, if somebody's an 80% member, maybe they should get twice as many votes as somebody who's a 40% member, right? Because they're spending more of their time and contributing more. So there's a lot of things that can be solved for communities, a lot of new tooling and governance tools that can be provided. And then as well, as I was saying earlier, if you're an online community, well, now you can plug into a bunch of different identity systems. You can plug into reputation systems and start solving those. There's a lot of incentives for communities to do this. And that's where we're actually seeing a lot of demand as we're talking to people about this, and they want to, different communities want to take advantage of different capabilities that this enables. But yeah, and then it's up to each community whether they open up their data, those membership levels, who the members are, what the membership levels are, to any specific app. And they can not open up or open it up to only certain apps, and they can choose which apps they want to use. And so you allow them to be stewards of their own data and owners of their own data and how they want to permission it. And so if they're getting value from it, that they're incentivized to do that. And if they're not, then they don't have to, and they can just keep it private.
Okay, so much clearer picture about how it works. And it's, a community management tool first. It seems like it's in demand, what you guys are building, and it reminds me of DAO tools, right? It's governance, and Web3 that's one of the other main killer applications other than financial and tokenization. It's more organizational.
Absolutely. And one thing I want to mention here, that on the topic of DAO tooling, it reminds me is everything that we're building is meant to be fully modular and composable. So we're just building the core substrate and with a certain kind of starting point of some basic essentials. But what are the attestation mechanisms that go into calculating how the different people have different levels? Like that's going to be very modular. Like people can build out different algorithms, and communities can choose which voting algorithms are used for governance and how they incorporate these levels, and do they require supermajority, et cetera, et cetera. It's like different people can build different algorithms, and those can be open to different communities. And then similarly with identity systems, build your own, use these mechanisms, plug into these outside ones that are also available that interoperate with it. Same with reputation systems, and then same with governance tooling, type of DAO tooling. It's just, you can start using a lot of what's out there that can then leverage this and provide you with better tools and better applications and so on. So we're not trying to build out all this ourselves. The goal is to just provide the very core substrate and use a lot of what's out there and help it be more effective in what it's trying to do.
That's fantastic. Okay. And you mentioned about 60 plus organizations. I'm curious what types. Farcaster, and so people might be familiar with those in Web3. But I'm also, you mentioned also Burning Man groups, so a variety of different types. I'm wondering what maybe you have you can share with us the variety of different types of organizations.
Yeah, and I was just to avoid conflating those two categories. Like I was earlier talking about just general social media applications that want to interoperate with MyTree, and then later I was talking about specific communities that would want to take advantage of community graphs, and then they would be served by some of those applications. And so on the application side, we really take a broad view of social media in a way that it's really like anyone that's doing anything social or has a social graph. It can be traditional kind of social media, whether it's like an Instagram or Twitter challenger, or it can be anything from like DAO kind of support applications that also are building out their own social graphs, to gaming and how do we better support gaming with their social graphs and allow them all to integrate and interoperate with larger social networks and provide a lot of value that way. So it goes in many different directions. And then any one of these decentralized. I actually wasn't even including Farcaster in the count of 60 because that is a permissionless one. These are ones we talk to as a way of, hey, do you want to interoperate? Whereas like with Farcaster, anyone can plug in, and we will be doing so. It's important to us to always be very complementary to everybody and doing it in a way that is, giving back to everyone we interoperate with and helping them be more successful. So it's like bringing Farcaster along, and helping it grow its network and combine with these larger network effects as well. But I am actually coming up on time, June. Sorry, I did have a hard stop here. I'm happy to,
Yeah,
we
so
can take a
final
slice here
question.
and continue later.
Yeah.
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 Or
So
the final
final
question.
question, maybe before we wrap up in a minute,
Mhm.
is any words of advice you would give to either founders and builders or enthusiasts in the crypto space, or like through all your journey doing a startup and just
Yeah.
being in the space? Any few words of advice you'd like to impart as final words?
Yeah, I don't know if I have any specific advice, right? It's such a personal journey and everyone brings to it something differently. What are you bringing to it? Who else are you able to partner with to complement you? What does the rest of your team do? What problem are you trying to solve? So it's also contextual. I would just say that what's really been important for me is having a co-founder we work really well together. We bring out the best in each other, and that's made a world of difference. It would have been not twice as hard, but 10 times harder and more difficult going it all alone. And so I think finding the right co-founder is one of the most important things, at least in my experience. And yeah, from there, just work on something you love because you're going to be spending a lot of hours on it. So make sure you're passionate about it.
Those are great pieces of advice. Really appreciate it, Leo. And yeah, hope to have you back soon to give us updates. So.
Awesome. Thanks so much, June. And happy and to have that follow-up conversation a little bit later as well.
Sounds good. All right. Take
All
care.
right. Bye.